Do you think Donald Trump has betrayed America first?
I think that this war is something that he promised he wouldn't do. War is clearly contrary to what he promised and contrary to the idea that your leaders should put your interests before those of foreigners, period. We put Israel's interests before ours. Trump did that. Would you describe it first as a disaster for the future of Israel? You've got tens of thousands of civilians murdered, but it's foremost a disaster for the future of Israel? No, it's foremost a disaster for the families of the dead.
Answer my question. It's a very simple question.
I don't know what your question is. Are you asking, does it have a right to exist, or do I want it to exist? Do I seek its destruction?
Fine, answer it that way.
Well, of course I don't seek its destruction. I've already said, as you know, because I said it to you, I don't want Israel to be destroyed.
I did not say that. You're absolutely putting words into my mouth.
So, because I believe, here's what I do believe, since you asked. I believe in universally applicable standards. And if they're not universally applicable...
Hey guys, welcome back. Public verdict here. This is one of the more unusual foreign policy conversations you'll see on mainstream media right now. Tucker Carlson sitting down with the economist's Zanny Minton Beddoes. And it does not go where you'd expect. She keeps trying to pin down exactly where he stands. Zionist? Anti-Zionist? Does he think Israel has a right to exist? And he keeps turning the question back on her, asking what right to exist even means, and whether it applies universally. Underneath all of that is a real argument about whether the Iran war serves American interests or someone else's, and whether Trump kept his own campaign promises. I'm going to break down what's actually verifiable here and where each side landed a real point, because there's more substance in this than the usual cable news shouting match. Stick around for that. Hit subscribe if you want more of these breakdowns, and let's get into it.
In your copious podcasting about this in the last 2 weeks, you have made the argument very strongly that the United States has been pushed into something not in its own national interest by pressure from Israel and the lobbying power of Israel.
Well, it has been. The question is whether the person who makes the ultimate decision, who would be President Trump, should have pushed back. That's it. Of course, Trump should have pushed back.
As previous presidents have done.
To some extent, some very limited extent. George W. Bush didn't push back. We wound up in the Iraq War, and now everyone pretends, oh, that had nothing to do with Israel. I was there. I was talking to Bush. That's not true. That's a lie. And that's why it's so important, from my perspective, to say out loud what is true before history is rewritten and disappears. And it's lying, and it gets us here. Because we say, oh, no, lobbying efforts had no effect. Really? We say that about our pharmaceutical policy? No. Everybody understands that every policy a large government makes, including ours, is influenced by various stakeholders who were affected by that policy. But this is the one area we have to be like, no, it had nothing to do with the fact that his biggest donors were pushing him to do this, or the BB visited 7 times in 1 year. Are you joking? I'm not going to play along with the lies anymore. I don't hate Jews. I don't hate Israel. I love my country. This has happened yet again. I can give you a whole list of previous times where it's happened. And I think we need to know what happened so we don't hurt ourselves further.
I am not saying don't blame Israel. I think Israel has its own national interests, and Israel was certainly pushing for things. But I think there is more agency and therefore more responsibility with the President of the United States and the Trump administration.
I wouldn't disagree. He represents me. I live here.
But that's important, because in the way you described it...
Israel pushed him into this. Now, he shouldn't have gone along with it. He should have pushed back. But to pretend that Trump woke up one morning is like, no, I think
I'm not suggesting that, to be clear.
No, Israel pushed him. The prime minister, and by the way, it's not Israel. There are a lot of people who disagree in Israel. I know some of them. It was the prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who pushed our president into doing this. And I hope this is the last time that Netanyahu or any foreign head of state will ever push an American president to do something that hurts America.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think we may be, as you yourself said earlier, at a tipping point in terms of the rapid decline within the United States for support for Israel. Maybe. And you see it huge. I mean, you've seen it for several years on the Democratic side, you're now seeing it on the conservative side, and you're seeing a collapse amongst younger people. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. How quickly is that going to change the politics of Israel in the United States?
I mean, it's hard to know. There doesn't seem to be a direct connection, not just on Israel or foreign policy, but on almost any issue between what our leaders believe and do and what the public thinks and wants. The public begins to believe, in their frustration at their declining standard of living, for example, or declining birth rates, or whatever it is that's getting worse, and a lot is, that there's no way to use legitimate means to change it. Voting doesn't work. If they believe that, then they will by definition find other ways, and those ways are destructive, and I don't want that. So I think it's very important that a government, even a non-democracy, even a monarchy, respond to the concerns of the population. You can ignore them for a while. If you ignore them for too long, you get overthrown.
Let's talk, though, a little bit more about how this declining support for Israel, which I think is one of the most significant political shifts in the United States in recent years. How is that shaping the MAGA movement? I mean, are you now seeing a split? I mean, when I look at the opinion polls, I'm told that there's 100% support amongst MAGA or 95% support for the war. On the other hand, you're clearly a man with a large number of followers who is making a very, very different argument.
I was standing next to Trump at his house when he got elected. I've known him a long time. I talked to him a lot. So, I don't fully understand what MAGA is, but I know that the core promise of the Trump political movement, Make America Great Again, was America First. And it was articulated by him repeatedly at every campaign stop for 10 years. So everyone in America knows this. I think everyone globally knows this. The core of this movement was the idea that you would, and we could debate about how you do it, but you would try to put the interest of your country at the center of every calculation about how you manage your country and how you interact with the world. It's the single most obvious and single most popular political concept ever devised.
Do you think Donald Trump has betrayed America First?
I think that this war is something that he promised he wouldn't do, not once, but countless times. And until YouTube is banned, we'll be able to prove that. And the idea behind it is not only contrary to America First, it may be its inverse. There's no argument that changing the regime in Iran helps the United States. And if there is an argument, I'd love to hear it. And by the way, if that argument is sensible and convincing, I will support it. All I care about is the United States. But I haven't heard that argument a single time. All I've heard is the kind of tiresome fear-mongering about nuclear weapons, which Iran did not have. It's insulting, actually, even to make that argument to me, that Iran's nuclear program posed such a threat to the United States 3 weeks ago that we had to launch a full-scale war against them. No one's even arguing that because it's stupid and the facts don't support it. So why did we do this when we did it? Because Israel wanted to do it. They chose the timing here. No one disputes that. And timing in war, as in life, is a lot of it, and it determines outcome. And they hadn't thought through what was going to happen next. The Israelis hadn't, and we hadn't, because we didn't have time to.
It sounds to me like you think he has betrayed it.
This war is clearly contrary to what he promised and contrary to the idea that your leaders should put your interests before those of foreigners, period. We put Israel's interests before ours. Trump did that. Bibi's wasn't elected president of my country. My president was. I supported him, obviously, voted for him. But, yeah.
Let's talk about the way the debate develops in this country, because I think you're right. It's extremely difficult to talk about the subject that you and I have just spent the last half hour talking about, because there is a conflation very often. Israel is vulnerable to being called anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic, and there's conflation by the exact people you've just been talking about, in the kind of firmament of political discussion.
Do you think that's a good faith response or a tactic?
I'm about to ask you that question. Clearly, I think you and I agree. We have both been critical of the Israeli government. I just want to kind of clarify terms a bit here.
Well, I've really been critical of the Israeli government.
I've been plenty critical of the Israeli government. I've told you at the beginning that we were against this war.
What do you think of Gaza?
What do I think of Gaza?
Yeah.
I think the war in Gaza, to start with, was a perfectly reasonable response in response to the horrors of October 7th. I think now the places, I mean, I've been there. Have you been to Gaza? I've been to Gaza since the war started.
They would not let
catastrophic.
me into Gaza. Trust me, very few journalists get into Gaza.
Yeah, no, I went with the IDF. It's the only way that you can go in, but nonetheless you go in and you see a flattened place. I think it is a disaster, a disaster for the future of Israel, a disaster for the Palestinian people, a horror, 70,000 people dead.
Why would you describe it first as a disaster for the future of Israel? You've got tens of thousands of civilians murdered, but it's foremost a disaster for the future of Israel. No, it's foremost a disaster for the families of the dead kids.
Absolutely. I made 3 points.
Because everybody sucks up to Israel in this way that suggests they're afraid. And everyone is afraid, and you know that. Everyone's like, the real problem is calling people anti-Semites allows real anti-Semites to flourish. It's like, no, actually, the real problem with calling people anti-Semites who aren't is accusing the innocent of a crime they didn't commit. And the real crime in Gaza is killing people who did nothing wrong. So those are the real problems, I would say. But no one can say it because you have to be like, oh no, but really, October 7th
I don't know what you're talking about, Gaza. We're having a...
Everyone watching this knows what I'm talking about.
Well, let's get on to that right now.
Yeah.
Because you are critical of the government of Israel. Do you believe in Israel's right to exist? Would you consider yourself a Zionist in that narrow definition?
What does that mean, a right to exist?
The existence of the political state of Israel as
but
it
has
existed,
a right. What does that mean?
That you think it should continue in its existence as a state right now. So you do not agree with Iran, for example.
Well, let me just ask, since you asked me the question, it's fair for me to get you to define the term so I can answer it. You've asked 2 questions. The first was, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? And the second question was, do you believe Israel should continue to go on as a nation state? And those are very different questions. So I often hear the phrase...
Having been created as a political entity in 1948,
does it have a right to exist? Is that what you're asking?
I don't want to get hung up on the right to
no,
should it continue to exist? That's how I define narrowly Zionism.
Because the phrase you used was devised by the Israeli government. Of course, does it have a right to exist? And so my question to you would be, what does that mean?
Why don't you answer my question? It's a very simple question.
I don't know what your question is. Are you asking, does it have a right to exist, or do I want it to exist? Do I seek its destruction?
Fine, answer it that way.
Well, of course I don't seek its destruction.
Okay,
I've already said, as you know, because I said it to you, I don't want Israel to be destroyed or have to use nuclear weapons.
We've established that you are in that narrow terms a Zionist. If that's how
I'm in no sense a Zionist. I don't want any country to be destroyed at all, and I don't want people to die, particularly ones who committed no crime, because I don't believe in killing innocents, period. That's the basis of Western civilization. Eastern civilization, it's a whole different view. They believe in collective punishment. I don't.
So you're in no sense a Zionist?
I don't even know what that means. Why don't you define the term, and then I'll tell you whether I am.
I've just defined it.
What's
you
a
said
Zionist?
that a Zionist, in my narrow term, this definition is that the state of Israel, the political state of Israel, has the right to continue existing.
The right? Where does that right come from? What do you mean? These are like, I'm not being a lawyer about it. I just want to know what you're asking me.
You answer the question.
Because I don't know what you're asking me.
Let's go to the third.
Wait, no. I think a lot. You don't want to define your question, and I don't know why. I don't know what you're asking me. I've already said I don't want Israel to be destroyed. I don't want anyone to be killed. And you've said, does Israel have a right to exist? Does it have my question is, what right are you talking about? Does Britain have a right to exist? Does the United States have a right to exist?
There was a world order built up after 1945 which suggested that aggression should not be condoned into countries. That countries with borders have the right to continue.
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
Which is why the first thing that Israel did within 2 weeks of this war starting, which is supposedly existential for them, was take southern Lebanon, take someone else's country, as they have done repeatedly. And no one even mentions that. And so I guess I would be opposed to that, because I guess I think Lebanon has a right to exist. I thought Gaza had a right to exist. But I noticed that as soon as we start apportioning rights, only one country gets them.
No, I did not say that. You're absolutely putting words into my mouth.
So because I believe, here's what I do believe, since you asked. I believe in universally applicable standards.
All right, let's break this down properly, because there's a lot going on here, and it doesn't split cleanly along the usual party lines. That's actually what makes it interesting. Start with the core policy argument, because it's the most substantive part. Tucker's central claim is that the Iran war served Israeli interests more than American ones, and that Trump's own America First framing doesn't square with launching it. There's real, verifiable material to weigh here. Trump did repeatedly promise, on the campaign trail and in office, to keep the U.S. out of new Middle East wars. Netanyahu's frequent visits to the White House are a matter of public record. Whether that access translated into decisive influence over the decision to strike Iran versus reflecting normal high-level diplomacy between allied heads of state is the actual dispute. And it's a legitimate one, not a fringe theory. Foreign policy analysts across the spectrum have raised similar questions about alliance dynamics shaping U.S. military decisions. And it's a question worth asking of any administration's Middle East policy, not just this one. On the Iraq War comparison, Tucker's claim that pro-Israel lobbying and neoconservative pressure played a role in that decision is a real position held by some historians and former officials. But it's also contested by others who point to a broader set of drivers, including intelligence failures around WMDs and post-9/11 threat assessment. Both explanations have serious people behind them, and neither one fully replaces the other. Now, the right to exist exchange, which is the moment getting the most attention, and it deserves fair treatment on both sides, rather than a decisive winner, declared. Tucker's move asking what the phrase actually means, whether it's a legal claim, a moral claim, or a request for a policy position, is a legitimate philosophical challenge. Terms like this do get weaponized in political debate, used less to gather information than to sort someone into a box. That's a fair critique of how these conversations often go in media. But it's also true that does a state have a right to exist is a real standard question in international relations and diplomacy. It's the same language used in discussions about the sovereignty and borders of any recognized state, and plenty of people ask it in good faith, not as a trap. Beddoes pressing for a direct answer isn't inherently bad faith journalism. Interviewers regularly ask public figures to clarify ambiguous positions, especially on subjects where vagueness can function as its own kind of dodge. So this exchange is less a clean knockout for either side and more a genuine disagreement about what the question is, even for where there's more solid ground. Tucker's point about the Israeli military's move into southern Lebanon following the war is factually accurate and worth sitting with. Israel did conduct ground operations in Lebanon during this period, and asking why that gets less scrutiny than questions aimed at critics of Israeli policy is a fair consistency challenge, similar in spirit to asking why some actions get labeled aggression and others don't, depending on which state commits them. The casualty figures around 70,000 dead in Gaza again trace mostly to Gaza's health ministry, cross-referenced by international bodies, and remain subject to real verification debate given the access restrictions in an active conflict zone. Both men in this clip treated the scale of civilian death as a serious moral fact, regardless of how you assign blame for the war's continuation. And that's probably the most solid common ground either side landed on. Here's the bigger picture worth taking from this one. This conversation cuts across the usual partisan map in a way a lot of Israel-Gaza coverage doesn't. You've got a prominent conservative commentator and a mainstream center-right economics journalist disagreeing sharply, and neither one fits neatly into the left's position or the right's position on this. That's worth noting on its own. Support for unconditional backing of any single government's wartime conduct is fracturing across ideological lines, not just along the usual left-right axis. And that shift is real and measurable in polling data across multiple demographics, not just among any one political tribe. So here's what I'd leave you with. Do you think right to exist is a legitimate diplomatic question? Or do you think it functions mainly as a rhetorical trap in these debates? And more broadly, do you think American foreign policy in the Middle East is genuinely shifting right now? Or is this still a minority view breaking through in a moment of media attention? Let me know in the comments. If you want more of these breakdowns that actually sit with the contested parts, instead of picking a side and running with it, hit subscribe, drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one.